share some of our most practical pattern cutting tips. And I think we're going to concentrate on pattern cutting because it's our niche. But of
Yes.
course, in the chat, we love hearing from you. And I've been watching over the messages already. Do feel free to ask us anything you want tips on as well. And we're really excited to be live, hopefully on both our channels.
Yeah, I'm trying
So,
to check. I don't
yes.
know if
So
it
do
is.
let us know whose channel are you watching on?
Yeah.
Mine or Trisha's? Yes, and we'll be talking all things pattern cutting. I'm so probably going to concentrate on the fashion side because I know we had lots of questions about professional looking clothes, and that's what fashion design is all about. And I'm sure we're going to get some great ideas from Trisha as well. And before we start, Trisha, why don't you introduce yourself for people who haven't met?
Sure. And also anyone, if you like this sort of thing, please hit that like for us to tell YouTube that you like our pattern chat so that it'll push it up.
One of Trisha's pattern nerds. And I come from a fashion design background. So I studied fashion, worked as a fashion designer, and also worked as a pattern cutting because there's not many pattern cutters out there. And there's a lot of fashion designers out there. And also,
Yeah.
both Trisha and I think we both love making stuff. Like fashion design can be a bit you're thinking a lot but not doing it. I always like to actually know how it works. So I work as
Yeah.
fashion designer and pattern cutter, and then I taught also as a college 19-year-olds for about 10 years. So that was a real learning curve, and now I'm online with you teaching you. So it'd be really interesting to see the sort of different tips we come up
Yeah.
with our different perspectives. And before we start, because I love fashion design, so I'm trying something new out for November, and I'd love you to join me. I've put a link in the description. It's a 3-part live design to draft challenge. And I'm basically it's going to be exclusive private video lessons. You can only watch it via the link, and you can join in. And we're going to go through a whole thing about how to actually pick inspiration for clothes you wear, how to go from an image to your own design, and then also how to actually make a pattern cutting plan. So if you're interested in that part, do join me. And I would love to see lots of you there so we can sort of help
And
you.
it's free, right,
Yes,
Charlotta?
it's free, and you can
Tell
sort
them it's
of,
free.
yeah, and it's gonna be on private YouTube lives because I like YouTube. It works really well. And then you can join in and you can sort of tag me or send me your designs, and we share them, and we can sort of analyze how you can actually make them. So I'm really looking forward to because I've been concentrating so much on pattern cutting to start getting back into design. And if you watch my analysis of designs, that's what I really love doing. It's sort of making images become a reality. And I know you do the same. You get
Favorite.
you
Yeah,
get
but
a
that's one of my
sketch.
favorite things that you do is, I mean, I do that as well,
Yeah.
but you explain it so well, and I love watching
Oh,
those
thank you.
YouTube lives that you do. So yeah, I'm sure it's
Yeah.
going to be a lot of fun. You guys should check it out.
But I think that's what our niche as well, isn't it? It's that sort of gap between, and then, like with yours, it's probably quite amazing sketches, but then you have the skills to make it a reality. And for me,
Yeah,
it's the
I
same.
mean that's what pattern cutting, pattern making is to be able to take an image or a design or a sketch and turn it and decipher, pick it apart. What is this thing? What are the pieces that, make it up, and then be able to go from there, because you really can't dive into making the pattern unless you know what the pieces are,
Yes.
or at least what you think they are, because sometimes you discover different things
Try-
when you're in the middle of it. But yeah, for sure. Hello, everyone. I just want to say hello to
Yes.
everyone. We have lots of people chiming in and joining from all over. We've got some UK friends and some
Yes.
Michigan and a lot of people here today. So thank you for joining us.
And we got
Very.
Natalie who put her alarm on so she could get up at
I
6
was gonna
o'clock in the morning.
say it's early for you, Natalie.
Yes. So thank you, Natalie, for your early alarm. And hello, Laura, and hello, everybody else. Hello, Saskia.
And
Yes,
Dee's here too. Good to see you, Dee.
yeah,
Hello, hello. Welcome.
love you
Well,
to.
yeah, and I found it really interesting. So, when we did those polls, it was people really wanted to learn about pattern cutting and time saving tips was another thing.
Oh,
And
I didn't have that at all. Interestingly, I think for time saving.
really, it was kind of, that was the close second for me on that poll. And then more than money saving.
Oh yeah.
which I mean, time is money, so it kind of goes both ways. And then professional pattern cutting or clothes making, which what like you were saying is in fashion. So, do you have a tip to start us off with, or somewhere that you wanted to go first? And then you have some questions too, right, from
Yes,
your
yeah.
your
I actually
channel?
Yes, if you want to join me, I've got a new broadcasting channel, which I'm really
Yeah,
excited about on Instagram. And that's sort of, it's a little bit our chat on YouTube, but it's like a little bit more intimate. So rather than talking
yeah,
to lots of people, we can talk directly and nerd out together, hopefully. But I have
yeah.
lots of people there, so I already got sort of specific areas people want tips on. And of course, if you in the chat have anything you'd like a tip on, do let us know as well. I think we're sort of going to go quite specific and very broad at the same time. So
Right.
the first thing what I was going to talk about is a really practical thing starting off with design. And that is whenever you're designing, think of it as a whole garment rather than lots of little details. And that's sort of what I learned
Mm.
from teaching fashion design because I do still the same. It's like a sweet shop. You want to have all the sweets, don't you? You want all the details. You want a special collar, special pockets, special sleeves, draping, layers,
Yeah.
maybe some frills.
It's so easy to over design, especially when you
Yes,
learn all the new things. You're like, "Ooh, I want to try this and that and this and that," and then it can get too much.
yes. So it's sort of like always think about it as actually an overall design. Does it go together? Is there something you can lose and it might actually be better? There's some, for example, I know a lot of the people who are from my side will love 1950s fashion, and there's a beautiful Dior trapeze style dress, and when they put like a little collar on, and it just completely distracts of the design. And you always think
Mm,
when you start with the overall silhouette, the design, before you start adding too much details, because you can always add the details on afterwards. And we talked about it before. We talked about
yep.
muslins or samples or
Mhm.
trowels. You can stick them on afterwards, but if you put them in
Yeah.
the beginning, it might distract from whether the design actually works or not. So it was,
Yeah, that's a great
yeah,
tip.
it's sort of practical, but also maybe a little bit more design based. But I thought that was the most practical design based tip
My
I have.
mind immediately goes when I was in school and taking my pattern making class, and I was so excited when I started learning pattern making. Yeah. Natalie said the
Yes.
same thing. It's just like, I want to try this and I want to try that and I want to do this contrast. And I mean, I did, and I love it actually. I still have it. I don't wear it really, but there was a lot. There was a lot going on. And sometimes if you have too much going on, it like competes with itself. So instead of noticing a special lovely feature about it, it gets kind of distracting with all the little lovely things going on. So you're not sure. You should be very intentional with where you put details so that you are basically telling people where you want them to look, right? Like, do you want them to look at your sleeves, or do you want them to look at your neckline, or do you want them to look, um, but that's really interesting.
Yes, because otherwise it can become a little bit like a patchwork or like a quilt.
Right.
It's lots of little bits, isn't it? And actually, I did an awful second year project at university. I still cringe at my video. You always have to do a crit in front of a whole class. And I
Oh, wow.
really want it was menswear as well. I'm not a menswear designer. So it was like it's just like frilly sleeves. I think it had maybe sort of like sort of Georgian cuffs. It had lace, it had embroidery because I wanted to. It was the one thing we made, so I wanted to put it all in.
Right.
Yeah, so it was
Right.
hand dyed, embroidered. So yeah,
Wow. Yeah, I did. Mine had like a long angled cuff that could be
yes,
half flipped up, and there was a contrast, and it was like an asymmetrical
yeah,
front and a peplum and
uh,
princess seams and like what else did I do? And then it had a skirt that went with it with a like contrasting
uh,
waistband, and it was like a short skirt over a longer skirt, but it was all one, and then
over
it had a
trousers.
ruffle. Yeah, I didn't put trousers in, but yeah, I should have. Yeah, it was a lot. I still have it. Actually, my cat ate a hole through the front of that skirt. The skirt was my favorite. The jacket's kind of like it wasn't. I liked it, but it wasn't something I was gonna wear all the time. The skirt I actually wore a lot, and then my cat ate a giant hole like right in
And
the middle of it. And I still have it because I'm like, maybe one day I'll figure out how to save this, but it's like there's so much going on. It
yes,
would be very odd to add something else, right? I don't know. I haven't figured it. Oh, and it had a slit too.
There
In the
you go.
long skirt. There was just so much going on. But yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, I
Natalie
think I
said,
might have a photo. I know I got rid of it, but I have to have a look now and maybe share it on the broadcasting channel, not in public.
yes, only hidden gems to people on the
Yes.
broadcasting channel.
So
Um,
you've got a tip, Trisha.
I do. And I would say, I guess it goes kind of hand in hand with the time saving tip. And just how I approach anything, but especially if it's for professional, like for business, but really anything, because time is always of the essence. And that is, there's no cheating. There's no cheating in pattern cutting. Like, and, unless you're in school and you're being graded on your process for a specific reason. But to me, is whatever is going to make it the easiest and the fastest to get your desired result. If that is, we just had a wonderful class from Claire Louise Hardy yesterday in my private membership, the Pattern Place, where she talks about cloning your clothes, like whether it's cloning your clothes, if that's the fastest route, or if it's using a commercial pattern that exists and changing it up from that, or if it's using a sloper and changing it up from that. Whatever's going to be the fastest route, I use all of those methods, and depending on what it is that I'm trying to achieve, that's what I'm going to go with. And if it's a mishmash of a couple of different things, and then I do a twirl or a mock up and then figure it out from there, if that's going to get me there faster, um, then that's okay. There's nothing wrong with saying that if I'm a pattern maker, that I can only use patterns that I draft from scratch, or that I can, that I'm not allowed to do something. I think having, draping is another way to get a pattern. I think that no matter what you are trying to achieve, if you have a way that's going to get you there quicker, um, that there's nothing wrong with that. I think that some people get hung up, and I know that Charlotte and I have talked about this a
Yeah.
lot, that like the right way of doing something, or that you have to do it an exact way. Now, I'm saying that because I have knowledge in all of these methods and I've tried them several times. If it's completely new to you, it might not be the fastest way, and maybe try it on something when you have more time. But having, knowledge on each of these things and using that, I think is very helpful. And like I said, it doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong or that you're cheating if you're doing something that makes it a little bit easier. So I just
No,
wanted
I,
to,
I totally agree, and I think that's why we get on as well, because we are
yeah.
always basically open for trying different things. I was teaching a private class yesterday, and she bought the Winifred pattern cutting book. It's really hard
Mm-hmm.
because there's all these rules, and I don't want to make
Yeah.
any of it. And when I was sort of
Yeah.
showing her how to do, she said, "Can we do that? Is that allowed?" And I said, "Yes, that's a great thing. It's like there's
Yes,
certain rules, like
exactly.
a dart is a dart." But
Right.
apart from that, it's up to you what you do with it, how you treat it. And I think sometimes I've seen lots of sort of fights on Facebook, Instagram. There are people get really angry saying you can only do this. And I
Yes.
think both of us, we just think basically what works for you, that's what will work. And if it,
Yeah.
you know, might not be what I use, but it doesn't mean it's wrong or right. We have all ways of working. And as you said, what's fastest as well, because I think time is so precious for all of us.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. And I think it stifles your creativity a little bit to worry about the right way
Yeah.
or how it's supposed to be done, as opposed to just diving in. Sometimes you just have to dive in and see what works, and it may not work. And you have to go a different method. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's
And I
fitting
think
as well.
maybe also because I sometimes have it on purpose. When I do like Tisha, I also have a website, and when I do a video lesson, I plan it ahead. I already have done the method
Yeah.
already. And the first time I do something on live Q&A, sometimes it goes really wrong or strange. I said, yeah,
Hmm.
that's actually normal. You have to try things out.
Yeah.
And then the second or third time, you work it out. And also, as you're figuring it out, sort of going wrong means you can correct it and get it right. If you never try it out, you will never get better at it. Uh,
And that's a great note. Natalie said her teacher taught her that there are many ways to do the same thing, and there are.
yeah.
And that's the thing. I see it come up a lot in fitting as well. And that's why I'm a big fan, and when I teach fitting, I'm a big fan of saying, to do a toile and to do a mock-up, because that's where you're gonna get your answers. It happens a lot with my students where they get so stuck in the trying to make it right and the measurements correct to what they should be, and they're stressing so much about the flat pattern. And really, I mean, my school of thought is, let's get close. Like, we're going to be kind of close. We know this is kind of where we want to go. This is the basic shape we're thinking of. And sometimes you mock it up or you do a toile, you're like, whoa, that's way wrong. And then you have a better place to start, because you're like, that was way wrong. What I'm actually looking for is this. Or sometimes you're close and it just takes a couple of little tweaks here and there, and then you're going to get there, because ultimately those answers are going to come to you when you put it on a body,
Yeah.
more so than even on a dress form. But dress form would be the second best thing. It's really hard to know. I mean, the more you do pattern making, the more you do cutting, like, I kind of know where things are going to hit on the flat pattern, where they're going to hit on the body, but sometimes I'm still off, and that's
I
learned
always
over
think
time.
with extra volume, that's always
Yeah.
the hardest, isn't it? When you add lots of flair or something, like on
Yeah.
the flat
You're
pattern
like,
cutting,
is
I
this
still
enough?
doubt myself
Yeah.
with stuff like that. I always
Yeah.
have to sort of double check.
But and then when you get into fitting, we are all of us, even if we have the same measurements, we are all different. So, if your dart needs to go a little higher or a little lower, or be tweaked in a certain way, or like, it needs to be farther away from where it's supposed to be, then if that's how it feels good, looks good on your body, then that is the correct way. There's no, but I read in a book that it's supposed to be this measurement, and
Or
trying to
your
force your
shoulder
body to fit
looks
that
different to
that
mine.
rule. Yeah, listen to what the fabric is telling you on the form, and go with that. Is just, you're the boss. That's something I always tell my students, is you're the boss. If you're making the pattern and you're making the garment, you're in charge. And whatever you want to do, if you're like, this looks really cool. I know it's not supposed to be that way, but it looks really cool. I mean, a lot of things I think in design, and I'm sure, Charlotte, I'm sure you know more of that, because you actually do a lot of research on vintage designers and things like that. But I bet a lot of things that have come to be are just from people going, what happens if I do this? They're like, that actually looks cool. Like, I like the way that looks. And then they go with it. And that's how new things, new shapes, new creations are come about.
Yeah, I think that's the whole of human development, isn't it? People,
Yeah.
you risk something, and it will either work out or not, and it might even look
And then
amazing.
to not beat up on yourself if it doesn't work out. That mistakes are part of the process. Like Charlotta was just saying, is sometimes you're doing it, especially if you're doing it in front of people. And you're like, oh, my teacher used to say all the time, what did she say? Should be and actuality are not always the same thing.
Yes.
So
But I love that they say, look, this is what could go wrong, so this is how we're actually going to do it.
how you fix it, like, and to not let that stop you, to just keep going, to just keep, okay, that didn't work, what else can we try, or where else can we start, and just keep going. So that's what I would say is my, like, number one most practical tip, just in general, like, approaching a new make, a new design.
No, I totally agree with you. I actually got a few tips related to making clothes professionally.
Hmm.
But one thing actually, so what you're saying is, that as you're drafting, and this is what I really learned from professional pattern cutting, it's not to sort of draft the whole garment at once, because that will take a lot of time. So actually think about what is like most important, and most of the time it's the
Mm.
fit of the bodies. For example, if you're making
Right,
top.
like the basic silhouette
Yeah,
without the
yeah.
details,
Are you
let's say.
adding, like, are you changing a fit? Are you making it tighter, wider? Are you, adding volume in any case? Are you moving the darts? So it's always make worth to actually do step by step. So you do a first step of pattern cutting. You make a quick trial just to
Yeah.
check it. And then if you're happy with it, and this is not for fitting like your original block or sloper, this is for actually designing. So you start on the over silhouette, and then you already have your trial, and then you can move on. You can then add on the sleeve and stuff. But rather than doing it as a whole, a bit, little bit about what we talked before, but this is more practical in the actual pattern cutting,
Right,
is
right.
do it step by step. And you start with the silhouette or the fit, and then you move on to all the extremities, and then you move on to the details. And if I was developing like professionally a real new style, I would do 3 trials for that. Nowadays, if I'm doing it for myself, I tend to sort of do a shortcut and maybe put the sleeves in at the same time. But if
Yeah.
you're doing something completely new, that sort of makes you don't get distracted by the collar maybe not sitting well.
Right.
You
You
can
can see the whole
concentrate,
thing
yeah.
holistically.
So you
Yeah.
get the
Yeah, that
bodice
makes
fit
sense.
right first, then you concentrate on how the collar fits and stuff like that. So it's again
Well,
not
and
overwhelming yourself.
then if you're focusing on the main thing and you add on the sleeve, because we do this actually, we
Yeah.
just did this with a project that we just did on my costume side. But you add on a sleeve and you're like, that sleeve's totally wrong. Like the body's good.
Right.
So let's revisit the sleeve and you can take that sleeve off, redraft, and then put that sleeve back on. And then you're like, yes, that's more where we want to go, you know, instead of
Yeah, and it's
having
sort
to
of
look
like,
at everything all at once.
yes, and also of course if you draft everything at once, it's going to take a long time. And then if the bodice is wrong, then you have to start from
Everything.
zero again. Like with the sleeve, you
Yeah.
can take it on and off, can you? But if the armhole is completely wrong and the bodice
Yep.
fit, you have to start from zero.
And
So yeah, do it in
I think
steps.
on that same note too, I think something that I always shy away from speaking of drafting, like drafting the whole pattern at once, is to not draft your facings and your linings and your pocket, like maybe all of your pocket welts, like figure out, like you're saying, that base pattern first. Because if the shape of your neck changes or the center front line changes, that facing then all has to change, and then you're redrafting all those pieces again. And it's just like, even when I do fittings on, say, commercial patterns that are purchased, I will, obviously I'm not obviously, maybe to everybody, but I don't usually do the linings and
No.
even the pockets. Like I just, if it's a cutaway pocket, like on a trouser, on a jean, I just pin that back in and mark where that pocket's going to go. Because if I lower the waist, there goes my pocket, and then I have to lower the pocket as well. And it's like, then I have to change all of that pattern again. So save yourself some time by starting with those major things. Like often when I'm doing trousers or I'm doing anything that has pockets, honestly, I don't usually put the pockets in to my toile or my mock-up. I will mark where I want
Yes.
them to go, or you can pin them and move them around as
Yeah.
needed, or even
I
the flap or
Yeah,
something.
but I think especially as pockets, because they actually, to make them perfect, they are quite time intensive thing to stitch because
Yes.
there's such a detail you look at. So on the 12, you spend hours getting it perfect, and then the angle is slightly wrong because if you stitch it quickly and badly, like I would do, then
Yeah.
it distracts you because it doesn't look good. So
Yeah, because
it's
you're
like
just like, ugh.
definitely, yeah, yeah. So you always start with the main attraction, and then you sort of add the other bits on.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a great
Yeah,
tip for
and I think
sure.
that, yeah, as you said, it goes for commercial sewing pattern, whether you're
Mhm.
developing a new style, whether you're working commercial, professionally, anything, where you make your own clothes. Um, I think with your own clothes, after a while, again, when you go back to your last tip, you can cheat and oh, this pattern works for me. I can switch this
Mhm.
around. But if
Always.
you're making
I would
something,
say 90% of the time I do that. I'm like, "Oh, I've done this before, like,
yeah,
let me dig that out and see what I did." And sometimes I'm not happy with starting with that, but at least it refreshes my memory to kinda going there, and it
yeah,
gives something. I just think it's a lot harder, I mean, and that's the way that I generally teach, is it's a lot harder to stare at a blank page and go, "Okay, let's get started." Whereas if you have something to start, even if you're doing major changes to it, you have a shape in mind that you're shooting for. It's something that it just gives you a starting point, I
and it's
think, and it
also,
helps you get
it
going.
means quite often you have the garment there still, so you can actually put it on and say, "Oh, yeah, I make this shorter, I change the neckline," so you can visually
Yes,
much easier see that, rather
yes.
than doing it completely in flat pattern
I
cutting.
would say I'm gonna add this as another tip. When we are drafting something like a jean, let's say, I pull out a pair of jeans that I have and I'm like, where do I want the top stitching? How deep is that pocket generally? Because again, there's no cheating. It's not cheating if I go into my closet and I measure
That's
things that I like already.
that's your, if you now go to fashion, that's your design archive. That's your reference.
Right.
If you study fashion, you go to a library, you get your references. But your wardrobe, that is your archive because you know how it fits, how, you like
Yep.
the top stitching, you like the angle of a pocket.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, so keep those things in hand. I mean, a question that always comes up, and I'm going to share something, another one of my favorite things with you. And if you don't know it already, you're going to love it. But I think I've shared it before. But like knowing which way the overlap goes, and especially like on the back of a skirt or like what side is the zipper on, those kinds of things. Those always, I'm like, I got to go check. And I like run up to my closet and I'm like, where do I have something that's like that? A
Fly
design
zip,
library would be fabulous.
fly
Fabulous.
zips. I check at existing time every time for fly zip.
And so, like, but there's a saying that I heard again, my teacher, she's amazing. You're gonna meet her soon. I'm gonna drag her onto YouTube here pretty soon. But she's still a good friend of mine. But her saying, and I heard this from her, she didn't make it up, and I've heard it other places since then. But women are always right and men are leftovers. And you will never forget. Women are always right over left and men are always leftovers, left over right. So then you can always remember which way it's supposed to go if you don't have a sample in front
Right.
of you. So that one's one of my favorites, and I've never forgotten it.
Yes. But then, of course, going back to Trisha's original point, if you want to, you can swap it as well. If
Absolutely,
it
because you're
works
the
for you,
boss. You
I'm
can do what you want.
left-handed, so I like to do it the
See,
traditionally male way.
and that's for me. I'm left-handed. Are you really left-handed?
Yes.
Know that I'm left-handed also because I'm left-handed also. So like when we're making costumes, is you're often dressing somebody else,
Yeah.
right? So I'm doing this with my left hand right now, like I'm zipping a zipper. Right-handed person would be zipping with their right hand. So I don't ever trust myself making a costume for other people because I'm like, well, what's natural for me probably not natural for the majority of people who are right-handed. So then I have to go and check.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're making it for yourself, then of course you can make it
Actually,
however
one
you
thing
want.
I would say, I always put, if there's a zip on the side seam, I always put it on the left because I once, when you're just sewing late at night, I made a pair of trousers and I put the zip on the right hand side. They're like so palazzo pants. And every
Yeah.
time I put them on in summer, I have to remind myself they're back to front. So that's sort of a set of rules which are helpful. Like in general, in
Yeah.
fashion, your care labels always on the left and your zip is on the left. And that's just like, it makes life easier. That's a rule I like to follow.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that that was always a rule
Yeah,
that
so
it's
all
always on the
everybody,
left.
if you check your side seams now, is it left hand side or right hand side?
Is it left hand? Oh,
Um,
interesting.
but that means
Or
that you
you
get,
can do like my jumpsuit that I just made. And what I did, because I wanted to try this, I didn't make it up. I actually heard about it from somebody else, another pattern, another garment that was being made. But a jumpsuit, like, or a romper, you have to get fully undressed and naked when you have to visit the Louvre,
yeah,
right? And it's annoying and cold. Like, so I heard this and it's like the back bodice is not connected to the pants. I made my jumpsuit that I just made like this,
there's
and
somebody on
there's zip.
Instagram who's selling a sewing pattern like that, isn't it?
Yes, I
Yeah,
think so. And there's zippers on both sides, so it kind of the back can just drop, and then your
yeah,
top stays where it is. So I have a
yeah.
zipper connecting the top, so it just stays, and then I have the two zippers on the side because I
Oh,
can, because I'm the boss and I can do that. And I
yes, yeah,
wanted to
that's a
try
great.
it. I thought it was genius. I thought it was a
Yes,
genius idea.
no. But that's how you work things out, isn't it? By not following the rules, but doing something else. And Heike is saying it feels good that even you professionals have to check some things. I thought it was only me. No, we all do that. I think anybody who says they're like an expert, they don't have to check anything. I never trust them because I think we all, the more you learn, the more you forget. So I always
Well,
like
there's
to
only so
double check. Yeah.
the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
Yes. Exactly.
I want to say another practical tip, and this is more for sewing, I would say, like making professionally made garments, because I am a sewing professional. I have, and up until the last couple of years, most of my sewing was for other people, for sale, for other things. So it had to be right, like when I'm making it for myself, I'm like, it's not perfect, but I'm the only one. And so you can kind of get away with that, which is nice. But when somebody's paying you, there's a lot more pressure.
Yeah.
So I do it even for myself, where if it's like fabric you really love or something that you really want to do, test.
Oh, I can't hear you.
You can't hear me still?
No, you just went really quiet. I don't know. Now you're
Am I?
fine.
Can you hear
You're
me now?
fine now. Yes, you just dropped out.
Weird.
It was an important
Um,
point, so I didn't want to miss it.
So testing everything, like test your fabric with the needle, with the thread. I can tell you I never sew a welt pocket into my garment the first time. I always do like a little practice run, even though I've done millions of welt pockets. I want to remember every time how to do it. And if zippers are new to you, like maybe trying to do a zipper, buttonholes, I always test a buttonhole like on the fabric, never go straight to the garment. Like,
No.
and there's nothing wrong with that. And I've been sewing for 30 plus years. And I still do it. And it saved me so many times because my machine doesn't seem to like that fabric and it's skipping all over the place. And I have to test out different needles. I have to change different threads, or I have to figure out which way I'm going to sew. If I'm sewing two different fabrics, which fabric is better on top than the other. It saves you a lot of time, especially if you're doing like a new kind of treatment in costuming. We're always doing weird things to make them look like what they're not, like fake zipper fly fronts, or I've had to make, pants, like vintage looking pants for acrobats that do splits and like all kinds of crazy things. Well, they used to keep bringing me ready to wear bought pants, and I'd have to put like a spandex gusset in the crotch, and then they'd rip those out, and I'm like, guys, you guys just need to get pants made. So I would make pants out of spandex and put pinstripes and like try to add in these elements, fake elements that make them look more like they're not spandex. So trying out any kind of unique thing like that, like adding pinstripes to spandex to make them look like pinstripe pants, that's a tricky thing. And so I tested out a couple of different ways of doing it until I finally went for the real thing. So just testing out, it seems like a silly thing, but don't just go for it
No.
unless because you might ruin that piece and be like, "Oh, no."
Yes, and the thing is, like with garments in shops which are perfectly made, that would have been exactly the same process because you have like your first sample, your second sample, and then
Mhm.
you got production. They test everything meticulously. They
Yeah.
really sort of, need exactly the information. And as you said, whenever I do a pocket, I actually check the method again that I remember, and I do a sample because it's sort of anything tricky where you're cutting in buttonholes, pockets. You
Mhm.
need to get that right.
Especially.
The chance, don't you, to get it right?
And
Um,
you brought up a good point about, like, what we're seeing in the stores and in the shops in ready-to-wear clothing. Those are manufactured items, meaning there is one person that all they do all day long is make buttonholes for you, and all day long, all they do is make zip fly fronts for you. You are doing all of those things on your garment, so it makes sense that you aren't gonna be exactly perfect every time that you do that thing, because you're having to do all of those steps. Whereas in a factory, in a manufacturer, they are just doing one, they are sewing that same pocket on 50, 100 times, a day. So of course they're super accurate and really good. That's all they're doing. And you're jumping around and doing all these different elements, and like jumping from one thing to another. So it's harder to make things perfect in that way. So if you're comparing yourself, and I will tell you, I will fully confess this, it doesn't matter what I've made, like that jumpsuit that I just made, like coat that I've made, this shirt that I made, everything that I made, I'm like, if I did that again, I would do this next time. Single garment I've probably made, I'm like, if I did that again, I would probably do it this way to make it better. There's always a little thing that you're like, next time I do this, I'll improve.
yeah, I did.
So if you feel that way, it's normal. Like,
Yes,
own it, embrace it,
yeah.
and be like, yeah, but I know that it's mine. I know where the bones are buried, and I'm still proud of it, and I'm still gonna wear it.
I did a class on proper, fold down two-piece collars, and you do the thing where you construct the whole thing. The last stitch is that you iron over your facing, and then you stitch from the outside, and you just catch
Mhm.
the facing. And
Yeah.
I've done lots of them. That's just one of the colors I taught every year. So but every time I do it, there's a little bit I miss. It's like because you're stitching blind, and again,
Right.
something in the factory they would do 100 a day. But for us, I said now I always just think yes, there's a little bit. It won't get unfrayed. It will stick. So I just leave it because I used to get really
Yeah.
obsessed with it and think it has to be perfect. Now I'm just sort of thinking nobody will know. But there's actually quite a lot of tips I thought because there's sort of things like that where I just think nobody will know. But there's sort of certain really practical tips for professional looking clothes. So it's not for
Yeah.
making clothes professionally for other people, but for
Right.
clothes which
Professional
look
looking clothes. Yeah.
professional. So
Yeah.
like Trisha and like we like to cut corners for ourselves, but there's also certain things to make it perfect. And one thing which I learned actually when I studied pattern cutting, they really drilled it in, and I think it's called under pressing. So whenever you stitch a seam, ideally you would press it straight
Press
away.
it flat.
Yeah, because
Mhm.
as soon as if you stitch a whole garment together and then press it, it's really hard to get each
To
seam
get in there.
perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you put in the dart, you press it open. What you can do, like, because I'm a bit lazy and my iron is a floor up because I'm in the cellar and you can't have an iron here. So I like to sort of,
Really? I didn't know that.
because I'm worried there's a fabric, so it would be steam and condensation and get damp.
Okay.
Worst nightmare.
Okay.
So slightly distracted. But like what I do is like I take the different pattern pieces. So I do lots of work on the back, on the front. I do the collar, so I can
Yeah.
do the flat pressing, but I can sort of go along with the
Do it
pressing
all
on
at
three
once.
pieces at a time. So a little bit of
Yeah.
patchwork. But I think that really makes a difference, and you
I think
always
so too.
press on the inside. Like there's a
Yes.
few things where you press on the outside, but 90% of the time, press on the inside.
Yeah. Well, just ironing, pressing
Yes.
general will really help your things look crisp and neat. Um, and I wanted to say Natalie said factories use special machines. Yes. They have special machines that they just like, it does it
Well, there
for
would
it
be
that we
like,
don't have access to.
for example, making jeans. That's a separate because we used to have to drive to the jeans factory. It was a separate factory from the clothing factory, and they literally, I think we talked about before, they had machines for everything. Like the rivet is a machine, the pocket is a machine, that side seam, that flat felt seam is a machine. So,
Oh, gee, yep.
yeah, you know. We have a sewing room if you're happy, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
It might just be like a table somewhere. So yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I love what you said about, doing what you can at the machines. When I was at, I audited some classes here when I moved to North Carolina. It was a couture sewing class, and the woman, she's retired now, Judy Adamson. She's amazing, wonderful teacher. But I took her class, and she used to work at Barbara Matera, which is a huge. I don't think they're around anymore. I think we lost them during COVID, but they're a big, big fashion costume house in New York for a long time, Barbara Matera. And she talked about in her class about there were, I think, 3 or 4 industrial sewing machines, and nobody had like their machine. It was like you use whatever machine is open. And then if you got up from that machine, somebody else was going to come in and start using their thing. So they would hate it if you were sitting at your machine pinning things, or like if you got up to use the iron, somebody else was going to step back in. So you did as much as you could while you were at the machine, and just like what you were explaining, like also my front darts and my back darts and my collar, so I have 3 things that I'm bringing to the iron all at once, and just working efficiently that way. So you're not getting up and down. And of course, probably most of you are not working in a shop setting where you have to worry about that. But it also, just like what Charlotta was saying, is her irons in a different position. Just that will save you time. Going back to the time saving tips, um, thinking about what steps can I do that I can be sitting at the machine and do all of these steps, which goes back to order of construction. So, commercial patterns have certain ways that they have you put an order of construction. The more experience you get with sewing, you're still the boss, right? So you can choose how you want to sew things, how you like to sew things, but you do have to be mindful about it because you can't do things before certain other steps, but some steps you can, especially seeing them in sections. And I think you and I have talked about this in the past where it's like, I know my front and my back are going to go together, but if my front has darts and my back has darts, you can sew those things separately. You can sew the darts on your back, sew the darts on your front, and then go bring both your front and your back to the iron and iron them at the same time instead of sewing your front darts, going to the iron, pressing those, sewing your back darts, going to try to think of how many steps. And especially when we're doing stuff where we're production lining, I'm not a factory, but we are doing things on health. I'm making 36 bodices right now for Quilt Fest. Teaching a class next week, and I thought about that. I divided them up into six, and I'm like, I'm gonna do all of my darts, then I'm gonna do all of my seams, even though I'm still sitting on the machine, and then I'm gonna iron all of them. Which, I did iron them a little bit. I cut my corners where I wanted to, but yeah, thinking about it efficiently, that's a way to save on time as well. But yeah, pressing, ironing can hide and help so much that people don't realize. Another thing to kind of maybe help if that's hard for you or you're not quite in that place with your sewing experience is they have a lot of these little mini
Yeah.
irons. And you can get I know a lot of people like Mimi G does that and Brittany Jones, they get a little mini iron and then they have that next to their sewing space. So you can have like a little iron, and instead of having to get up and go to a different place to iron, it can be right there by your machine, and then help you with that ironing step as well.
Yes, I always quite like it as well because you get up and you sort of walk around a bit.
Yeah, you're not just people always talk about hand sewing. Most people are not huge fans of hand sewing. And I can't say like I don't want to be hand sewing for hours and hours, but I kind of would love when I get to the point where I'm like, oh, I just have to like hand sew this for a while. And it's like I can hand sew anywhere.
Yeah.
I don't have to be sitting in front of my machine to hand sew. I can hand sew on the couch watching TV. I can hand sew at a hockey game. I can hand sew, outside in the sun and have a nice, so that's one of those things. Like
Yes, and
any excuse
also
to get up and walk
yes,
around,
and also
change the scenery.
I invested into a proper steam iron. So it's got a I don't know actually how you call it, a separate steam station.
Yeah,
You've got like 2 or 3 liters of water, and
yeah.
you got a denim setting. And I quite like it because I learned to use industrial irons, and industrial irons were very scary, but they're so amazing. We got like a vacuum ironing board.
Vacuum board. Oh, you have a
They
vacuum
weigh
board.
about
Those are nice.
I think about 5 kilos. They're really heavy, so you can do the pressing without having to use clappers and all that sort of stuff. Literally, your iron is strong enough. So I quite like to have quite a powerful iron. So I never sort of know if the mini ones are powerful enough. But
Not really, but I will say that the steam is surprisingly
oh, is it
good
okay?
on them a lot of times. Yeah, somebody gave me one, a little mini. I don't use it as much. I'm the same as you. I have an industrial gravity feed iron. So instead of having the steam base, I have it the hanging like a jug
Yeah,
hanging with distilled water, and it is heavier. The
yeah,
iron itself is heavier, and it produces a lot of steam. But
yes.
yeah, it makes such a huge difference.
Yeah,
I
if it's
haven't
a
used.
mini one, because it's always annoying when the steam comes out intermittently and you're sort of
Yeah,
waiting on it.
yeah.
So yes, if the mini ones have good steam, then it's definitely sort of worth
The
considering that.
number one problem I have with domestic irons is that they shut off, which I know is a safety thing. But it kills me. Like I always think about when I first moved out here, I was staying at my ex's parents' house, and we were down below, and so I just had one of my industrial machines in one room. It was like a basement, so there was like one industrial machine. My serger was in another room, and the iron I borrowed her iron, and it was a domestic iron, and I had the ironing board set up, and then I had my table there. So I would be like prepping and working on something, and I'd go to the machine, and I'd like walk past the iron, and I'd like pretend to iron so it would kick back on. And I'd sew my seam, and then I'd go back, and it was so crazy. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I can't. Like, I made it work. But
Yes,
then she would come down and she'd be like, "This iron is on. Did you know this?" Because I'm like sewing. I'm
yes.
like, "Yes, yes. Don't
Don't touch
don't
it.
unplug it, please. You're gonna like impede on my productivity right now."
Yes.
But
No, it's quite. It take quite a long time to warm
heat
up. So
up.
yeah, no, totally.
Yeah.
you know, if you're at the point and you know you want to invest in a really good steam iron, it's really worth it.
Yeah.
Because I think mine
But
warms up in 2 minutes as well. So even if it does turn itself
very
off, which is annoying, but it heats up so quickly. It doesn't, and it's proper hot at that point, not just
That's good.
lukewarm.
Yeah, and with steam. And Natalie and Sue Snoops 819 are talking about it in the chat with the
Yeah.
mini irons, the Oscillo mini irons. Sue just got one for her recently and she loves it. So
Yes.
definitely, yeah,
Yeah.
it's great to I could see how that would be really
And
handy.
I think it's
I
always
haven't gotten in the
the
habit of it.
compromises, you know, if you're faster, then again, you know, you might manage certain things when you really want to steam it, you go to big iron, but
Right,
it
right,
makes it a lot more
exactly.
enjoyable, isn't it? Um,
Exactly.
I've got a few recommendations. Oh yeah, a talk on iron, so you can do it another time.
We do. That's
Yes,
a good idea. We
all
haven't
the
quite had
burns
that.
we've got.
Right? For sure.
Another thing, and I always get it wrong. Astrid, she's watching, she will know because I've talked about it. I think it's called understitching because I think we used to call something in French, but that's when you have a facing, like I've got here, you iron or you press all your seam allowance into the facing, and when you do a top stitching line about 2 millimeters away from your original line, and that's called,
Just on the underside though,
yes,
not
on the
on the
underside. I think
outside.
that's why it's called
Mhm.
understitching. It's like I'm
Yeah.
really bad at technical terms, and that means that all your insides are sort of held together, and they're like a solid line, which gives you a really nice straight edge. So if you ever
Yes.
sort of struggled with, you know, your facing coming out,
Yeah.
that really helps with it a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So
Understitching is like I love it because
yeah,
it's such a nice clean finish and it's really a simple thing to do.
yeah, fast.
It's just a matter of knowing about it. But
Yeah.
yeah, it gives such a nice, clean, professional look.
It
I'm
sort
a
of
big fan of
turns everything
understitching.
over. So instead of the
Yeah.
seam showing like a seam line, you basically have a sort of edge curling over. So you can
Yes.
use that on anything basically, any sort of
Yeah.
hem you have. And I think even if I add a facing on my skirt hem and which I then might blind stitch or something, I still
Mhm.
do understitching. It just sort of
Yes.
turns it over. So that's something very little but practical, which will make clothes look a lot more professional.
Absolutely. I completely agree, for sure. I did a Tricky Thursday about understitching, I think.
Yeah.
I have. I just don't know if it's on
Yeah.
YouTube or if it was pre my YouTube days, but I have
And
done
when was it? Yeah,
understitching.
when a lot of people ask me this, I think, oh goodness, I've
Yeah,
completely
I
forgotten
know.
it. Oh yes, a
That's hard
lovely
when I make a
design.
new
I did
video
that.
every week. I don't know.
Woo.
It's hard to remember.
And Natalie says I understitch first, then press because the understitching makes the seam roll under easier. Yeah, basically understitching makes everything easier. So it's easy to do. So it's great. And it also makes construction easier and the next steps. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it's a thing
Yeah,
worth
because
doing, adding to your construction.
Because it's, oh yeah, because sometimes what it already fixes things where it should be. So when you're ironing, you're not slipping and moving, it's sort of
Mhm.
laying flat, so it makes a complete difference. Another really random thing I was thinking about is to make, if you're using bias binding to finish seams,
Mhm.
a lot of commercially bias binding is quite wide, I find, and I don't like the
That you
quality.
purchase.
Yes, the cotton is
Yeah,
always really stiff, which makes
it
it easy
is.
to use, but it
Yeah.
always it's a really big weave, so it looks a bit cheap. So a really good thing for professional looking clothes, if you have bias binding, um, make it yourself. So you have really maybe a
Yeah.
cotton lawn, or you know, it could be organza, but something really neat, tightly woven, really thin. And you can also cut exactly the length you want,
Yeah.
because it can look really chunky if it's too wide, and some of the commercial ones are really wide.
Yeah.
You can get these presser foot, so you can hand press it, but you could even get like, I like a half a centimeter bias binding bit finished, and that makes all the difference to your seams. If you know you ever have an unlined coat and you want the seams to be nicely
Mhm.
finished. Very niche.
Yes.
Wanted niche tips. This is a niche tip.
Yes, yes. No, I love making my own bias. And honestly, that's usually my go-to. I don't even try to look
Yeah.
because it's so hard to find the right
Color.
amount of the right color and yeah, and you can make it out of anything. And there's a neat trick. I've seen it a lot on YouTube and Instagram is where you put two pins like into your
Oh yes.
ironing board and then you can fold your tape and then like have an iron and just like pull it through and it goes really quick if you don't have like a bias tape maker. that would do the same thing. So it's a
Yeah,
way to do it at home. But yeah, homemade, like handmade bias tape
it's
is
much
really a
nicer.
nice touch. A
Yeah,
nice touch, yeah.
and the machines, the little, little tools, they're quite cheap as well. So they are sort of, and they do work. Again, you need a good iron. It's like actually the pressing which makes all the difference.
Yes, yes, for the
So again,
bias
also
for
you can
sure.
choose a fabric which presses beautifully as well.
True,
As well.
true. I agree.
Um, and we love hanging out with you as well, everybody. Snoops.
I have a quick question for you. I'm sure it's the same, but I learned some things. So we had the lovely Claire Louise Hardy, like I was saying in my membership, she wrote this amazing book, Clone Your Clothes, and she's also from a costume background, so we totally hit it off. But she's British and lives in London, and so we were discussing different things that we say. Like, what do you call that point at the bottom of the dart on your pattern? I call it a dart root. She says that she calls it a dart cap. You know what I'm talking
I
about?
I am a creative
This
pattern
part. Oh,
cutter.
here we
I
go.
have no idea what it. I actually sometimes I come
This.
short at this. I have no idea, Trisha, because
You don't know?
I was talking to somebody yesterday. I went to a fashion school. They didn't teach you. It was, that's not the thing you learn. So I have no idea.
She says, because I call this, because when you have a sloper, it doesn't
Yeah, the
have
root.
the
Yeah,
dart in there. Yeah, the dart root. And she says that she's always referred to it as a dart cap. And I'm like,
I've never
I
heard the
never knew
word
that.
cap. It's interesting. Is, yeah, I would call it end base. Maybe we can ask the chat. What do you call it? Actually, I have another question from the chat. I had
Oh,
two questions today. That people wanted tips on. One is about rotary cutters and
ah,
Fisher. But the chat, somebody asked for recommendations for printers to print out large scale. So I'm not sure in the
water
in the
printers?
UK for domestic use it probably would be A3. Anything bigger A1, it becomes a real pain. So I personally, if I've only ever printed out 2 PDF patterns, and I just go to our copy shop, and I think you use an architect's blueprint, and I think it was £5 for A0. So I do that.
Yeah.
But if there's any recommendations for good printers, when I did my pattern cutting degree, we actually had an A1 printer, and we had a technician, and his whole job was to basically just keep the printer
And
running
paddings. Oh
because
my
with
God,
the
that's
ink,
awesome.
it gets blocked up all the time. So it was
Oh,
just
yeah,
like
I could
and
see
we're
that.
never allowed to use it because it was saying, like, I'm
Well,
just,
because it can mess it up.
yes, yeah.
I remember I was teaching when I first started teaching. I would teach at this school. It was a magnet fashion school in Vegas, actually, and they had a plotter printer, and not only would it print, the lines and cut, but it would also cut. There was a little cutter,
Ooh, or
so
like a
it
leg,
would score out pattern, so you didn't
yeah.
have to completely, like, cut it out. It was already half
Ooh.
cut out for you. Yeah, it was really handy. It was really nice. But that thing would go off all the time. I was the only one who used it. And I'd have to figure it out, like, every time. It
But
wasn't
that
the most
sounds amazing.
user like,
And
you get it going or the blade wouldn't
Laura
work
is
or something.
recommending Net Printer, a good and fabulous sew in the UK.
Fabuloso.
Are these people who print for you, Laura, or is it actually a
Ah,
printer?
yeah, I bet it is. I bet
Yeah.
it is.
Oh, Leslie, thank you. Leslie had no name for the days of a base of a bat, so
Interesting,
I'm not the only
interesting.
one.
Yeah, and, Sue, so a dart leg.
It's
This
a
is a dart
sign. Yeah.
leg, and this is the dart root, is how I teach it. And Sue knows this because she's one of my students, but this is the dart root. But we learned yesterday in class that apparently in the UK, you guys call this a dart cap, at
The
least
thing
in
is,
some circles.
I don't know how it is in the US. I'm sure it's the same in places like Australia. It's like each fashion school is completely different. So there's some
Sure.
like London College of Fashion is really technical. I went to
Yeah.
St. Martin's, that's John Galliano, Alexander
Yeah.
McQueen. If anything, like you're not allowed to do pretty clothes. You have to be, which I sort of had a bit of an issue with. You have to be all like avant-garde and
Yeah, yeah.
conceptual.
I kind of
Um,
love that.
yes, no, it's
I
both
almost
is
went to
fun,
St.
but
Martin's
I want to
actually.
make clothes.
I was encouraged that I would like that
Oh
there.
yes, and Laura says they print for you. Yes, I used a local. I just googled it. I think they're called Minutemen. and you literally upload your thing, and an hour later you have it, and they're really lovely and cheap. So it was
That's
like,
wonderful.
yeah, but like a
In
few
the
years ago, you have to go in and you have
in
to
the
deal with
US,
printers. So,
Sue said we should call it the foot because of it being the dart leg, and that's the
oh
end. That's
yes,
funny.
yeah. Have a belly button. Oh yeah, because then there'd be the belly button at the top, wouldn't it? So it makes sense.
um, we have a couple of places that I usually direct people. I haven't had a lot of PDF patterns printed for me. I think you can do it on any Kinko's, FedEx Kinko's, as long as you have the
Oh yeah.
file. I have not done that yet though. But PDF plotting is one, and then there's another one. I want to say like Brooks something that we have here in the U.S. If people are looking for that, and they're pretty inexpensive. It's like $2 a page,
Yeah.
you know,
So
and a lot of pages aren't more than two, or a lot of patterns aren't more than 2 or 3
yeah.
pages.
And the other thing somebody asked is about our rotary cutter sharpeners worth getting. And I thought you use
Ah,
rotary cutters, aren't you? Do you
I
sharpen them?
do, and I remember now. I did see that in the channel. I do not use rotary cutter sharpeners. I also, another question that comes up with rotary cutters, because yeah, I pretty exclusively use rotary cutters, is do I have a paper rotary cutter and do I have a fabric rotary cutter? And the answer to that for me is no, although I know a lot of people have their different ones. I kind of use and I don't have a sharpener either. I would like to try, and it's funny, I asked Kenneth King about this because he kind of uses both. And he was like, it's kind of like, how he explained it is that he doesn't use a sharpener because he's like, it's kind of like reusing tissue. You know, when it's done, it's done. Like,
Yeah.
why are you trying to keep it going? But what I do, because I do try to be as sustainable as possible with everything that I do. I mean, I could probably always get better, and I'm working towards that. But I usually start with a fresh blade if I'm cutting fabric, like if it's
Silk.
especially nice fabric, especially, I'll put a new blade in. And then I generally will go to then using that for patterns and paper and whatnot. And so that'll dull it more. So obviously, when I go back to cutting fabric, then I would put a new blade in. And then we use a lot of stuff in costuming again that can be sticky, or like stuff that you don't want to use your nice blades for. So then those ones that are no longer good for paper are downgraded to the like crafty rotary. So I have different handles, and I save them. And then even still, when they're like really, let's say I don't need another crafty one, I'm not doing a lot, I save the old ones and I'll use them for rip. In costuming, we use a lot of razors instead of seam rippers
Yeah.
because it goes faster. You have to be really careful, but it can go really fast. So I'll use old rotary blades for ripping out seams and stuff. So I don't really just like throw them away
Yeah.
all the time. I usually downgrade them through their life cycle and kind of use them in other ways, is what I do. So I haven't really had the sharpener. I would like to
Yeah.
try them, but it's like, what did they say? Somebody was telling me that they were an intern somewhere years ago and there was nothing for them to do, so the person made them sharpen pins.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, that's what I think about with rotary cutters. I'm like, is that really necessary? Like,
Yes.
how much are you really saving at that point?
And I also think you have to sharpen them so perfectly everywhere exactly the same. Otherwise, you end up with one
Like
part
a
which is,
niche.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the glitches are the worst if it's when you're cutting silk and stuff. That's when it starts pulling,
Absolutely,
isn't
because
it?
then it'll cause a snag or a
Yeah.
pull, yeah, for sure. Which is
So,
why when I'm going to cut some nice fabric, I always put a new blade in. But
yeah.
when I'm going to paper, I'm like, as long as
Yeah.
it cuts. You
And
know?
when it's a sticky stuff. Yeah.
Like
I was
I
just
have a
laughing because
specific one that's for
yeah,
sticky,
you
gross
are
stuff.
like the nightmares of clothing, aren't you, costumers? Because we like when fashion, we always used to have the scissors. Nobody else was allowed to use. I just can imagine some of them
Oh yeah.
costume coming in.
Scissors
And,
I'm still like that with. Like
yeah.
you have your like icky scissors, and then I have like I never travel with my nice fingers with my nice shears. Like because I'm afraid that I'll lose them, because I've had some really nice I had some really nice wife shears, like dressmaking shears that I got when I finished the program at school. And I took them to a fitting that was of course crazy. We were doing all the things, and lost them, and I was so sad. So I don't take any of my nice shears when I'm traveling. I have like less nice shears that if I lose them, I'm not going to cry about it.
Now, people are agreeing with you about using reused rotary cutters as sort of paper and stuff. Yeah, I use the same as scissors. So I sort of I downgrade it and then I sharpen them all again and I start
And
again.
then usually if I'm working, you're gonna see my scissors around my neck like this. These things, I probably should buy them more often than I do. These are like I'll cut anything with these. These are like they're knife points so that I use this instead of a seam ripper most of the time to get in there and like clip. But I will cut zip ties with these. I'll cut plastic bags with these. I'll snip my threads with these until they just die. And then I'll get a new pair. And that's just I mean, it again, it goes back to, you want to be mindful, you want to be sustainable as much as possible, but in the end, I'm oftentimes doing this for work and it's time is money. It's
Yeah,
like,
and also you need to they need to work, don't they? So it's
yeah, it just needs to be something, and these are around my neck, so it's like I know where they are, I know where they're gonna be. I don't have to go hunting for anything. And sometimes when I'm, trimming seam allowances and stuff, sometimes I can get away depending on where we are in the life cycle of these. I can use them, and then other times, a lot of times I'll go to the mat and rotary cutter it because that'll be faster anyway. So I try to, be mindful of it that way, but I am a big fan of use what you got until you can't use it anymore. And I will limp things along until
yeah,
they can't be used anymore. Use it
at
for
some point
every ounce of it.
it basically becomes a pain, doesn't it? And it basically breaks things more when it fixes stuff. And I think that's
Right, right. Well, and
move
I just
on.
think about those sharpeners, and I've asked, I mean, it's a valid question because I've asked about it too, because you spend the time to sharpen your blade, like how much longer life are you actually getting out of that,
And also
as
you
opposed
have
to
to
just
buy the
moving to a new
sharpener,
blade.
which is probably quite
Right.
expensive and uses a lot of material. So, for example, I have a Japanese sharpener block for my knives and scissors and gardening tools. So that's a
Yeah,
little
yeah.
block. It does everything. But if I had to buy an expensive sharpener, which had to be produced, it's probably yeah, sometimes not as efficient, isn't it?
Yeah, recycle, repurpose, and reuse. You
Yes.
don't always have to have the fancy a lot of these tools, it's marketing, right? It's not always they want you to believe that that's, like, the better thing, but,
Yes, they have to be
but nothing
produced.
wrong if that's what works for you and you find that that works for you too.
I had one more thing for professional looking clothes. And this my old boss used to be French, and she used to be very particular about finishing clothes. And she always had a rule that and this was a quite expensive brand, so dresses were like £600, coats were over £1,000. But we weren't allowed to have like no visible stitching, like hems and stuff, with a normal thread.
Mm.
So if you have top stitching, it either has to be special, like tailor style stitching, or it has to
Oh,
be invisible stitching. And I think if you if you're making a special coat or you're making like a dress, even if it's like a 1950s, 60s dress,
yeah,
it have a deep hem. If you add a top stitching line to it, that will sort of reduce it. It will take away
yeah,
from the flow of it. It will add
right.
a flat detail on it. So you always either have like invisible stitching. That's quite a nice fun thing to do by hand, blind stitching. Or
Yeah,
if you have if you have a stitching, you can see it has to be a feature stitching. It's the same as jeans look good because they have chunky stitching. If you make a pair
yeah.
of jeans and
It's
you use normal thread,
purpose,
it looks
intentional.
wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just to be, but again, it's about being mindful and purposeful how you finish garments, basically.
Yeah. 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 That's a good point. It is time consuming though, so it really has to depend on if it's worth it. And like in theater, everything has to be durable for us is
Yes.
something that we're always thinking of, and where sometimes with hand stitching hems,
Yeah.
those are the first things to go. And I always think like we just did a costume for somebody to people who are not in theater, but they needed a big fancy costume. So nobody knows how to sew, nobody knows how to do these things. So everything that we did, I was like, I don't want any hand stitching on this because what's a really easy thing is like, oh, you just sew that hook back on or you just sew that button back on could be monumental to somebody who doesn't know how
Yes.
to
Yeah.
sew. So I'm like, let's make it kind of like so nothing will be falling apart that they have to deal
Yes.
with as much as
Yeah. So this
possible.
is more, I think, if you if it's
To make
professional.
it look a
There
professionally
are
finished, yeah.
machines which blind stitch, so you would do professionally,
Yes,
but you make it for
absolutely.
for yourself. That's a really nice finish, basically.
Well, a lot of
Um,
domestics will do the blind stitch as well,
yes,
so
yeah,
it's a little different.
yeah,
Another nice detail I would say if you're trying to elevate your look, and I know Natalie, you've done a lot of these really nice
yes, yeah,
finishing techniques too, but like doing hand bound buttonholes
yeah.
is a really nice like finished detail that looks very
Look, nice.
professional. Like you've added
Yeah,
a
but
lot
that
to it.
makes blind stitching very fast, doesn't it? Like
Absolutely.
you can
It
blind
is
stitch your
not for
hem in
something.
front of a telly in half an hour. I wouldn't want to do a button.
Yes. Yes.
Oh,
Bound buttonholes are a commitment for sure.
yes.
I remember I did hand done eyelet or like grommets
Oh goodness.
for my corset when I was in school. Just because I wanted to, I'm like, when else am I gonna
Yes.
do
No,
this?
I've
Like,
done some jackets as a it looks really beautiful.
yeah.
Or
So
velvet.
that's a way to elevate it. Like
Yes.
if you are just doing it for yourself, because I always feel like if I'm making it for myself and it takes me a long time, it's for me. Like I don't have any pressure to like impress somebody else. So I'm going to do those little fancy things for myself. And if it turns out wrong, it's like, I did it for myself. But if you're going through the time and the effort to make yourself something special, make it special. Like don't rush through the process, enjoy it. But everybody's, sews for
Yeah.
different reasons and maybe
Yeah.
that's not the
Yes,
reason that you're doing.
totally. And yeah, I think we're out of time, but well,
Yes.
maybe we should do a whole because I had lots of questions about trousers as well,
Yeah.
back options, so maybe we need to do different live like this, and also maybe to do a live about stitching clothes for other people, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
interesting
we
as
could do
well.
that. Well, and we do have it scheduled for next month over on
Yeah.
my channel, but I don't remember. And this seems to work out well. The YouTube was nice to us today.
Yes.
Sometimes it's not
Straightforward.
nice to us.
Yeah, we are back on the 21st of November, which is just after my design challenge
Yes.
finishes. So
So
if you
go
haven't
check
signed
out
up
Charlotta's.
there, you
Yeah.
can. If you're already my student, you can still join. If you don't know me at all, you can join. Everybody welcome.
Yeah.
And it's
Sounds
free.
fun. And I will be at International Quilt Fest in Houston next week. So if any of you are going, please look me up. I love meeting people in person. And I will be there all week. I'm very much looking forward to it. I've heard it's just a wonderful event. So I'll be teaching one class on pattern making, one class on fitting, and then I'm also giving a lecture. I think the two classes are sold out, but the lecture is still available if you guys want to join me. And I would just love to meet up with. I know a couple people who are going, but that's what I've got going on with me. But go check out Charlotta's challenge. It sounds like a lot of fun.
And we
Uh,
look forward to seeing you next month. Bye bye, everybody. And
yes.
thank you for joining us and chatting with us too. Bye.
Bye everyone. Thank you.